Dzień dobry. I'm John Cohn, and I'm here to talk about a very serious topic, and that is the importance of play. And there's no time in history that play has been more important than right now. And I'll tell you why. But let me start by explaining myself a little bit. I am a nerd, and I'm very proud to be a nerd. I've been a nerd all my life. And when I was 8 years old, I told my parents I wanted to go to MIT and I wanted to be an engineer because I loved making things. But I've been at IBM for almost 39 years, believe it or not. It's the only job I've ever had, but it has been a really, really interesting ride. Before I tell you about that, I want to introduce you to a couple of other people. This is my late father-in-law, Gabe Mariano. He also worked for IBM for 36 years. He was hired right out of high school, and IBM sent him to IBM College, where he became a mechanical engineer, taught him how to make things. He loved making things. We loved talking about that. The best thing, he used to make these great robotic things out of stone and electronics that would actually assemble some of our biggest computers. We had so much fun talking about that. But what he really made was my wife, Diane, who also worked at IBM for about 8 years. She's now a yoga teacher, which is kind of cool. But between us, we're all engineers, and we have had 83 years of working in engineering, 83 years working for the same company. Now, it's pretty interesting because that's an important part of the story. Now, I'm very proud to be in an industry that has changed this much over this short a time. It is really amazing to have had a front row seat. I think about the first chip that I worked on had 126 transistors. Those are the little switches that make a computer work. The last one I worked on had 6 billion transistors. But when I look out, if I actually look over, I say we have about 83 years, I can look back over the history of my company, which is over 100 years. In 2011, we became 100 years. And if you look at history of computing, not just with my company, but the whole industry, it's a really interesting story. It started out with mechanical devices. We made things like meat grinders that would compute how much cost per meat it was. So it was basically a computer, but it was running by gears. If you look over 100 years now, 110 some odd years, how much computing has improved? Let's say you had $1,000 to spend on computing, even adjusting for inflation. It started with mechanical computing. Then it went up to electromechanical computing, where there was a motor, like the Mach 5 computer that was at Harvard, that actually could multiply 50 10-digit numbers in a second. It was amazing because it had a giant motor, but you had to put cotton in your ears because it was so loud. Then vacuum tubes, which I learned when I was a kid at MIT, where they would get so hot that they would actually fry bugs. Bugs would burn out in there, and that's where the notion of bugs came in. To discrete transistors, which I learned on when I first came here. That's what my father-in-law and I worked on. We made computers that were really cool and just took a lot of energy to integrated circuits. Now, why am I showing you that? Because this is a great proof of, this is almost like, some people call it Moore's law, we call it Dennard's law. This means that the amount of compute you could get is going up logarithmically. It's amazing, exponentially. It's an amazing curve. But what's interesting is it's not a smooth curve. You see these red lines? It's a bunch of everything's working great for a while, and then these moments where something stopped working. Like if I look around here where I started at IBM, 1981, we were making these great bipolar computers, but they were starting to melt or catch fire occasionally. And we thought, well, maybe the salespeople can explain that. But we had to make a leap. And we had to actually take a leap where we knew how everything was working. We just kept turning the crank. And all of a sudden, we had to leap across to a new technology. And notice that actually the next technology, there was a gap there. It was slower. But if we hadn't got on it, then we would not have been able to move up. Now, these moments of disruption, so there's this continuous innovation, and then these moments of disruption, this is a moment of disruption. And what I find is that the companies that are able to reinvent themselves, that kind of get through those things, are the ones that are still around today. I'm happy to say my company is one of them. Many companies like Nixdorf or Xerox didn't get to make that. On the other hand, you can get disrupted by somebody else at those moments. So the companies that kind of wait and see, they don't really get that far. The companies that jump too early, well, maybe they succeed, maybe they're not. Why is this an interesting thing? Because if I look at it, you know, I'm talking about computers now, but what if I talk about our lives? This notion of how do you face disruptions like a global pandemic? Instead of how much compute you could buy, it might be how much money you make, or how much responsibility, or 1 over the amount of hair you have, or how much fun you have. And in, I think, each of our lives, your lives, just like my lives, there's a curve like that. Things are smooth sailing, and then all of a sudden there's a decision. Sometimes it's a decision you make. Where do you go to college? You know, in my case, who do you marry? I didn't have to worry about it because my company issued me a very good wife, excellent wife. She may show up here, who knows? The company had nothing to do with how many children I make, where do I go to grad school? Should I get a tattoo of my company in a place I can't show you? But then sometimes disruptions happen outside and there are things you can't control. And that's where I was really trying to think of what is the lesson of almost 40 years of working in industry? What is the secret to having a happy and fun and productive career? And without going into it too much, I've had a very productive career. I'm an IBM fellow, I have lots of patents, but most importantly, I enjoy my work. And not everybody does. Well, I was asked about this because a couple of years ago, I was asked to give a talk. And sometimes giving a talk like this is very scary. You know, all respects, I'm gonna make this recording for you, you'll watch it, you may or may not like it, and I may or may not hear from you. But I got asked to do something really scary, which is to talk in front of my youngest son, Gabe's high school graduation. And I tell you what, if you're going to suck, you cannot suck in front of your kid's school, especially in a small town. I live in a town of 2,000 people. I was really nervous and I was trying to figure out what would I tell them? What is the lesson that I could bring to this? And it was a really interesting thing. It happened late at night. What is it that has allowed me to go through what I'll eventually tell you have been some really interesting disruptions and some really sad ones? Well, it came to me in a flash, and it was the importance of play. And what I am arguing to you is that, as strange as it sounds, something that we know how to do as kids, you know, when we're babies, we play, we don't care about the outcome. We don't worry about who's watching. We don't care about stealing other people's ideas. We don't generally care who's stealing ours. We're in the moment. Well, that spirit of play is what makes most of us choose the field that we go into. I chose engineering. Actually, engineering chose me. I liked making things. I liked taking things apart. Eventually even learned to like putting them back together. But that playful, like trying things, even making mistakes, was just so fundamental to me. But why am I telling you that? Because you know, whatever you do, you might be a lawyer, you might be a musician, you might be anything. What happens, we all come from that sense of play. But what's scary is that occasionally, not occasionally, unfortunately, pretty often, life tends to choke that out of you because you get all sorts of responsibility. You get work, you know, work becomes, oh, I've got all this money, you know, I got to make money, I got to get a promotion, I got to get this deal, or I won't get married, or blah, 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 blah. And you get from this place where everything was super fun, where you're making like little colorful things, to just work. We have something called Play-Doh in this country, bright and colorful. I found this article in the New Yorker that talked about work dough. 65% of people say that they don't really like their jobs, that they aren't having fun at work. My secret that I told those kids, because I remember what it was like being at a high school graduation and some old guy or lady is up there going, "When I was your age." Well, I was that old guy now, and I was like, what do I tell them? I told them to play. I told them to misbehave. And I tell you, it's not just me. I've been talking to people all over the world, different fields, that sense of play, you have to work really hard to keep that back in your life. You really do. Let me just tell you a little bit quickly about my history. When I look back over almost 4 decades of making stuff, the times that I was most creative, the times that I was most productive as an inventor, I have about 120 patents. And the most of them I got while making really complicated technology, but it was actually driven by play. These chips, this is PlayStation 3, the Sony PlayStation 3. This is the Microsoft Xbox 360. This is the Nintendo Wii. This is the Power 7 chip that was in the Jeopardy game show. Those were those chips that I was working on. They were incredibly hard. They were supercomputers that kind of fit under Christmas trees. I remember thinking about writing Bill Gates and asking him if he would move Christmas out 2 weeks because we were having trouble. But, you know, when I think back, those were times where we used to compete for who had the least sleep. But it turned out that it was so motivating. First of all, it's pretty cool to think that the most advanced computers of those days were created because people wanted to play. They wanted to play video games. They wanted to do streaming. As a matter of fact, the graphics capabilities, the graphics programming units that we developed back in these days, like these components and these components, now are driving AI. So it all came from play. And even though we were working the hardest, by playing, I realized it was the most innovative. I even have the numbers to show that. And it's not just me. But it's easy to say, well, you should just play. And people say, oh, you're an IBM fellow. You're an IEEE fellow. You know, so of course you get to play. And I go, no, I am an IEEE fellow. I'm an IBM fellow because I played. And now I want to say, you know, it's easy to say, well, play because play is good. But I want to talk about resilience, which is a really interesting topic right now. I mean, we're in this, you know, global pandemic. It's a crazy time. I've even made a mask because I got tired of looking at people and not being able to see what they were talking about. Well, it's times of distress where play actually becomes very valuable. And I'm going to tell you this story in a strange way. I was very, I love my field and I love my company. I know I'm not supposed to be pitching my company, but they're a good place. But I love the fact that there are so many different talented people, economists, physicists, you know, mathematicians, and I love playing with their technology. A couple of years ago, I'd say about 6 or 7 years ago, I went into a laboratory to play with a $15 million toy. It was called an atomic force microscope. It was actually a guy from my company won a Nobel Prize for inventing it. And I found out because I met him at a party and he asked me what I did and I was telling him about chips and I said, what do you do? And he goes, oh, I move atoms around on a piece of copper or something. I said, oh, someone won a Nobel Prize. And he goes, yes, that was me. And I was like, wow. But anyway, I was there to play with this piece of equipment. This picture down here of IBM is 18 atoms, 18 xenon atoms in 1998. It was the first time anybody had manipulated atoms directly. Well, I was there for a particular reason. I went into this laboratory, 2 6-packs of beer, a bunch of bad country western music, and a mission. And my mission was to go play with this. So here, the first thing that you do when you have a very expensive piece of equipment is try to break it and do something fun. The first thing that anybody does with a piece of equipment like that is that they write bad words. They write dirty words. I don't know why, it's human nature. But then the next thing they started doing is making things like this movie. This movie is a picture of individual atoms that are moving around in stop motion. So I wanted to go play there, but it was a really strange circumstance. And I'm going to tell you something very hard now. So I mentioned that in my path that while IBM didn't tell me how many children to have, I had 3 beautiful boys. This is Gabe on the far right. He is now 20, just about 25. He's a second-year biochemist PhD student working on cancer in Portland. This, my oldest son, Max, is about to turn 32. He works at a really cool place called Meow Wolf in New Mexico. He's a great maker. And this is Sam. Yesterday would have been Sam's 28th birthday. 14 years ago, Sam was visiting friends and in Florida, far away from us, and he stepped off a curb and a car swerved to avoid hitting his friend, and it hit Sam. And his spirit left his body immediately then, but he was a strong kid. We got this call. We had to go down and make the easiest hard conversation we ever did, this decision, and that was to donate his organs. His organs, Sam's very strong 14-year-old organs, saved 4 people's lives. So what does that have to do with this? And I know that's a hard thing to hear. And you might be going, why play? Well, I was there with 2 6-packs of beer and a bunch of bad music to write my son's name in 33 carbon monoxide molecules on a $15 million machine and 2 6-packs of beer. I was crying, but it was fun. It was wicked fun. So sometimes, you know, play comes to the weirdest times. That it wasn't the most natural kind of way of expressing grief, but it was fun. And the reason I was doing that is because you really have to play when it's hardest, because when Sam died, we started making these stones called Sam stones. If you go to samstones.org, when he died, people were asking us about how we were doing. So we started making for very close friends. We would make out of river rocks. We have a river just down the street here, making it with his name in it. And so many people asked us that we started making them out of clay. And enough people started asking us, and again, this is 14 years ago, that I taught myself the world's worst programming language, PHP, and added a device that I added a website that allows us to track where people would either place these or even find them. At this point in the world, there are probably 50,000 of these out there. North Pole, South Pole, fired into space. Sometimes people send me pictures that I can't share because they're so weird, but it was really play. And it's all about play during the hardest times. I've met so many people through this exercise. And it turns out that wasn't the only kind of thing. You can probably imagine, it was very hard to restart my life, all of our lives, after losing a son, someone you very much love. But it turned out that play was the thing that actually got us back into the world. I mentioned that I'm a very big fan of MIT, I think. I'm actually the co-founder of Vomit, Vermont's own MIT club. And we have a club. Shortly after this, that someone came to our club and said, "Hey, Vomit, can you make something for us?" The basic job was to make something that was 7 meters tall that was designed to scare children. Now that is a very good use of an engineering degree. So we used this thing to make this giant thing, and then we would be able to figure out, could we make the children scream? Could we make the parents scream? Could we make them wet their pants? Whatever. But it turned out to be a fabulous thing because I built it with students. We got a whole bunch of people together, and by making things with people, we showed that making things was fun, and they went off and made things with people. I've been doing that, and I can only show you this is also 7 meters tall. This must have been my 7 meter tall epic, but this is a 7 meter tall carousel for carrying hippies across the desert. This is with both Ben and Jerry of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream. Ben asked me, could I build a big thing for carrying hippies? Oh, that's my brother driving. So this is something that was actually for a festival called Burning Man. We made it in 40 days, again with students, and everybody brought something to it. I did all the controls and electronics. My friend Homer did the mechanics, but all of these students, and then taking it out onto the desert at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is a great opportunity to talk to somebody about engineering and science, believe it or not, even if they don't have all their clothes on. It was really, really an amazing thing. And I found that making these things was incredibly fun, but it turned out to be incredibly productive. A couple of years later, my company decided to get into the Internet of Things, which is about how you connect small chips, something I love, to big computers, something that I use. And the job was in Munich. We had this beautiful building, these beautiful twin towers, and my job was to be the Yoda of the lab there. So I got this job every other week. I would leave my schoolhouse here in Jonesville, Vermont, get on a plane, get off in Munich, and I would work in this building to try to bring it to life. Well, how did I get that job? They asked me, well, what do you know about Internet of Things? Well, nobody in my company knew much about Internet of Things at that point. All I did is I showed them pictures of 7 meter tall robots that scared kids and giant things for carrying hippies out. And they said, not only are you hired, but you can run this business. So that's what I did for 2.5 years. So my play got me that job, but that wasn't the only one, because it turned out that while I was there, I started realizing that artificial intelligence is such an amazing toy, but it's a very useful thing. And it's something that people need to think about because it can do a lot of good, can also be scary. Well, when I started bringing this building to life with all my colleagues with IoT, I fell in love with AI. And I have to say, I kind of fell out of love with commuting every week from Vermont to Germany. So I asked about, there was this other new opportunity. I've mentioned MIT, go MIT, a couple of times. Well, it turns out that my company in 2017 started a lab, the MIT-IBM Watson AI Lab. And I got asked if I would go there and be Yoda for this laboratory. Now, it's a very interesting thing. It's one of these disruptions because I wouldn't say I was an AI expert then, I'm getting to be, but they had formed this laboratory to actually look at new AI, new artificial intelligence algorithms, new physical processes for doing AI applications for healthcare, for security, for financial service, and AI also to make it less scary as we head closer and closer to more, kind of general AI. We have to make sure we can trust it. We can count on it not to be biased, that it can explain itself, that it's secure. Well, my job was to go there and again, be the old weird guy there. And it has been such a great thing. It's really like Back to the Future. Again, my playing over in Germany, which was a result of my playing and making stuff, is what got me this fabulous job. Now, I spend a lot of time working on, this talk is not about what I'm working on there. Hit me up at johncohn@us.ibm.com, and I can tell you about the cool stuff that we're making there. We're working on neurosymbolic hybrids. Let me tell you, he's gonna be cool. But I also, no matter what I'm doing, I'm always misbehaving. One aspect of play is getting away with things. So I have a small set of projects that are around making AI fun for people. And basically, here's an application that you can download right now. And if you want to, there's the open source code. If you're inclined like that, we can show you how to make your own. It's basically a musical instrument that runs on your phone or tablet or computer. And it kind of sounds somewhat horrible. Nothing like 500,000 volts and slightly beautiful music. But you can now, the reason I made it with my friend Va is that we can now go in and I can meet students. I love working with students and show them how this works and get them into an educated conversation about artificial intelligence and all that other stuff. I tell you what, when you lead with fun, you lead with play, it's always an easier conversation. But even there, and I'm about to be done, I want to tell you that sometimes you even have to completely break with the past. And it was sometime after Sam died, and I was really trying to think, what did I want to do when I grew up? I think I decided I wasn't going to grow up, but I wanted to become a school teacher. And then I realized I hate kids. So what was I going to do? So I went to my wife and I said, beautiful hippie wife, what should I do with my life? I want to work with kids. And she looked at me lovingly and she goes, how do I know? I'm cooking. Go ask the cosmos. So I took my beer, I walked outside and I looked up and I said, cosmos, what should I do? I really did it. It was snowing and nothing happened. But the next day, a woman called me out of the blue from Hollywood and said, do you want to be a scientist on reality TV? Now, I had never seen a reality TV show. I'd never seen Survivor or anything. I don't know if they have them in your part of the world, but if I had ever watched Survivor or any of those shows like that, I probably wouldn't have done it. But anyway, I wrote down it. They said, what animal would you be if you had to be an animal? And I said, I was a squid, because my fingers were in everything. I was full of surprises and I was chewy if improperly cooked. And they told me later that that answer got me the next interview. So they flew me out to LA from Vermont. That's about as far away as you can get. I showed up on the curb. They were going to pick me up. And instead of shaking my hands, they tied a bandana around my head, threw me in the back of a van. I knew there were other people there, but I didn't know what was up. And for 3 days, they made us take things apart and put things together and blow stuff up and answer a bunch of psychological questions like, I dream of killing people, true or false? Or they asked, aliens control my thoughts, true or false? And that was a really hard one, because if they did control your thoughts, then you would answer wrong. Anyway, I was really confused, but I didn't think I had a chance. 3 weeks later, I got a call and they said, okay, you're on the show. You got to be out here for almost 3 months and you can't tell anybody. And I thought, ooh, maybe I should tell my work. Anyway, I went out there and this is what happened.
We're on the edge of a global catastrophic disaster.
An amazing experience. 59 days of putting up with 10 people that you never met sleeping in one bed. Having to figure out how to get water, which was really, really hard. Trying to figure out what to eat. I've been a vegetarian for almost 30 years at that point. My first red meat was rat, but it was great. We were building under constraints, just like now, where you didn't have all the tools you could. You couldn't go out. You couldn't look things up. I came away from that so amazed. Go look it up, The Colony on Discovery. But I want to leave you with just one message, that of all of those things, I worry a lot. And I think the message about play is a reminder to myself. Like I said early on, you have to keep recommitting to it. I was worried that the thing that I was creating on the TV show, that 12 million people were going to see it and say, what a moron. Well, eventually you just have to get over it. But it really got driven home after the show. I came back, went back to work after the show before it was on TV and had no idea what was up. I ended up getting called down to our headquarters because I was an IBM fellow. They wanted to know, what did you learn? And I told them about the show, but I hadn't seen it, and they loved it. This was the #2 guy in IBM. He said, I love it, I love it. But I was worried. So when I was driving back to Vermont after this, I called somebody, and I was worried that every third word in this show was beep. It's a reality show. And he goes, don't worry, as long as you kept your clothes on. Well, the third day, it had started raining. We were so dirty. All my friends ran out to grab the water. I went out to the back and I took my clothes off, and the water was coming down, washing all this stuff off of me. And I turned around, there was a guy with a camera. And I said, you wouldn't do that. He said, I'd pick up that plastic. Well, 2 weeks later, after I'd had that conversation, the show started. This is the last 45 seconds, and that's after I picked up the plastic. Let me just say, they were generous with the pixelation, but I was so worried that I had screwed up my whole career. My parents were seeing this, my kids were seeing this, my boss was seeing it, the #2 guy in my company was seeing it. And you know how we just get so worried? I had just totally thought I destroyed my entire career. And you know how in whatever you do, you're probably like, if I don't get this deal, I won't get the promotion. If I don't get the promotion, I won't get married right, and then I won't be able to get those kids, and I'll end up living in a ditch. And we just build up this worry, just like today in this pandemic. We worry about what's going to happen. Well, it might be good, it might be bad, but it doesn't pay to project yourself in the future. So my main message, my main takeaway of this is, in times like these, don't worry, keep playing, because, and this was a great quote from George Bernard Shaw I found actually before I was making this talk, was, we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. So just keep playing, especially during these challenging times, and reach out if you got any questions. One of the great things about play is when you make a mistake, you just kind of go through with it and enjoy it. I noticed just at the end that this rope is on my head. Well, it's because I live in an old schoolhouse, and that's the bell. So keep playing.